In the near future, conflicts are going to become more serious and more frequent, with the availability of nuclear materials as well as possibility of germ warfare and the effects of climate change and resource shortages. We're going to be facing many more challenging situations. So we as a species need to be able to resolve conflicts, to prevent conflicts without violence. The use of violence in a conflict only perpetuates the cycle of violence. So we need to change our consciousness, and that means changing our relationship to each other and to the planet. The organisation that I founded in 2001 is called Peace Direct, founded on the knowledge that local people know best what to do in a conflict. So what Peace Direct does is to identify them and then find ways to support them, often through people in safe countries, supporting people in very, very unsafe places. So we've identified the most effective local peace builders in now 19 different conflict areas. We know all about them, we know what they do, we know how effective they are. And one of our discoveries is that $1 spent on the prevention of conflict is more effective than $60 spent once a conflict has broken out, trying to calm it. So a lot of this work is focused on the prevention of conflict. It's not very glamorous work. It doesn't hit the headlines as explosions do, but it requires enormous courage and tenacity. And I have to say that women in peace work are often the most effective because they have the skills of being able to connect and communicate, to be unthreatening. They often are speaking for the victims of conflict. I'm convinced, and I think many people are now convinced, that the way forward is to have more than 50% of women in top decision-making positions, not just in governments, but in business, in local administration, in the military, everywhere. How do we do that? Well, it's happening, but there's still what they call the glass ceiling. In Scandinavia, they found that as soon as there were more than 33% women in the parliament, that they changed the shape of the debating chamber. So instead of having us and the opposition, the government and the opposition, like schoolboys, they changed it to a rainbow. And you sat wherever you felt on the spectrum according to the subject being discussed. If you felt very conservative about this, you sat there. This changed everything in the way Sweden made decisions. And Sweden is now a much healthier society for men, women, and children. So there are all kinds of ways this is being done. But the main thing is to, whether you're a man or a woman, to promote, I wouldn't say only women, but men who think with their female half. Because some women are very militant, very thuggish, very violent. So it's not just women, it's people who have a developed feminine, a developed yin, I call it, like in China, yin as opposed to yang. So we should identify those people who often don't want to be in positions of power.
That was the BBC's Jeremy Bowen speaking to us a short time ago from Tripoli. And let's come to you, Dr. Scilla Elworthy, first of all on this, because you've made a career out of conflict resolution. What would you do with this?
Well, Gaddafi may be getting fed up with what's happening in Misrata. I'm getting fed up with seeing entirely male faces on the screens over all this coverage. And we know from the internet reports that women are actually playing a very significant role in all these revolutions. Particularly, there's been some very outspoken women in Bahrain. Women in Yemen have unprecedentedly come out in public and felt safe to represent themselves and their interests in the public squares. The reason I mention this is because in the post-election violence in Kenya that happened nearly 2.5 years ago now, a Muslim woman played a very significant role in calming the violence throughout the country. This is Deka Ibrahim Abdi, and she convened a large group of retired Kenyan UN peacekeeping force generals, as well as civil society representatives. And what they did was to send out a message on cell phones to 60,000 women across the country to report what was happening. They were then able to map the hot spots and the cold spots of the conflict and work out with those local people and the community leaders a program, a strategy for each area. Now, if that kind of strategy was, and I'm sure it is available in Libya, why isn't it being brought to the fore?
Well, is it though? I mean, what possible role could women play?
We can see to it that women are moved into positions of policy making in our society. It's already happening a lot in many countries. However, when you come to peace and security, and better still, defense, 90% of the policy-making positions are still filled by men, with disastrous results. Because the male way of dealing with conflict is to use force, and it doesn't work, as we saw in Iraq, as we see in Afghanistan. So, one of the measures that is being taken by the World Peace Festival and the World Peace Partnership is to select 20 conflict areas and to identify qualified women who would like to move into policy-making positions. So we build up an archive, a database of biographies of qualified women, and then we work with organizations in that country to move those women up and become negotiators at the peace table, or to become decision makers in that society. And then things begin to change. What I'm really talking about here is the news coverage of it. We don't hear female voices. We don't hear the views and the experiences of women reported in the coverage. It's almost, I would say it's 95% male faces and voices that we're hearing and seeing. And if we profile women more, if we seek them out and give them some airtime, I think we'll get a very different result.
The base ground of doing this is to be willing to mix the personal and the political. Because what we tend to do is think, oh, that's politics out there. We watch the news, we think that's the responsibility of somebody else. Now, what Camilla was emphasising and what Judith was talking about earlier, I think every one of our speakers has been saying it in some way or another, is to apply what we know about human beings and what they really need to the world out there, and to accept the kind of analysis that puts always the human being first.
You don't have to only act for people who are far away. You can also resolve conflict in your own community. For example, if you live in a city and there are a lot of people from different racial backgrounds or spiritual backgrounds, you can find people with whom you might not agree. Maybe people who dress in a certain way, or people who seem to be stirring up religious hatred. So you would go to somewhere where they gather and open a conversation. Just show that you are open to hearing their views, and then you might need to listen to them and really listen to them, because what people who are fanatic most want is that their anger is heard. So you may have to listen to somebody who's very angry, but the very act of listening, you'll find that they slow down a bit. They start to speak more slowly instead of a rant, they start to slow down, and you might ask them a question. And as they know that you show them some respect, they will begin to get in a position where they can take notice of you and maybe hear what you think. And then you can enter a dialogue. In this way, a kind of small miracle happens. Because once you feel that the other person has heard you, not just heard your words, but felt your feelings a little bit, you begin to relax a bit. Suddenly there's a transformation, there's a change, and you feel a little bit warmer to the other person, a little bit more sympathetic. So, we start at home. We start with our local fight, and when we get good at that, we can try to help with conflict in our neighborhood. And then if we're really good at it, we can say, okay, maybe we can help some other people sort out their fights.